Do you want to talk about Amber Frey?
I know everybody wants to talk about Amber Frey. And
yeah,
Amber Frey, here's the thing. I do not. Because Amber Frey is completely irrelevant to the facts of this murder. Amber Frey unless Amber Frey was spotted on Loma Avenue or had something to do with being in that neighborhood, had something to do with the actual murder of the facts of that case, of where Laci was or where Scott was, connected to the forensic evidence, no. She is not relevant to investigating what happened to Laci Peterson.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Listen, this is going to upset a lot of people, but we're going to get into it, okay? As promised, I said I was going to review the prosecution side of Scott Peterson and the defense side, the new filings of Scott Peterson's team. We're going to look into this. So Netflix just dropped their docuseries where they revisit the case and interviewing Laci's family, of course, but also Scott's family, which I thought was a good thing. The documentary is called American Murder, Laci Peterson, and it's essentially giving us an account of all the things that have happened on that case from the time to where we're at right now, the trial, everything, which I think is great. Now, please keep in mind, we're still going to watch the August 20th Peacock first time interview with Scott Peterson in, 20 years? And we'll review that as well. But let's get into what the defense is saying about Scott Peterson. Let's go. The LA Innocence Project's court filing indicated that there are things that need to be investigated that were not initially investigated at the time of their investigation into the missing persons case of Laci Peterson and then the murder, of course, of Laci Peterson. And a couple of highlights I want to bring right off the bat that we'll be addressing as we're reviewing some of this. There were eyewitnesses that alleged that they had seen Laci Peterson walking the family dog the morning that she disappeared, potentially establishing a different new timeline of the day that she actually died, who last saw her. There was a burglary at the Medina home, which was across the street from the Peterson home, on Christmas Eve morning. The theory that Laci encountered the burglars as the crime was underway and could have been killed for it. Now, this burglary theory from the Medina home, I want to show you guys a clip that I was able to take from the new Netflix series, okay? Because you're going to hear Detective Broccini and others explain it as to what exactly was going on with this burglary, what was ignored, what wasn't ignored, how they treated it, and I'm going to stop it to give commentary, of course, under fair use. Let's watch.
There were still several leads that we were investigating.
A burglary across the street from Laci's home remains an intriguing development. This home was broken into sometime between Christmas Eve and December 26th.
We still want to find these burglars. The Medinas live across the street from the Petersons, and they left on a few-day vacation the morning of the 24th, and they came back on the evening of the 26th.
Now that man, again, is Detective Broccini. He's a very important character in this whole situation, in this case, because he has received a lot of scrutiny and backlash from his investigative skills, what he did, what he didn't do, and he came into question during the trial. Keep him in mind. This is who he is, okay? And he participates in this documentary.
During that time, their house got burglarized. The problem with the burglary story is that even from the beginning, it seemed to be a moving target, and there was nothing very concrete about it. The Medinas were burglarized. Clearly, when is a big one. Originally, it's the 24th. That's because a neighbor believes they saw a suspicious van outside the Medina house on the 24th.
So the witness saw a van parked, I guess, in the area of the Medina home on the 24th. Okay? Laci Peterson goes missing on the 24th.
There's people that were talking about maybe she was abducted by the burglars, and then people were calling in about a van in the neighborhood that some people had seen, some people hadn't. There was one neighbor that saw it. Originally, she said it was white, then it became tan, then it became brown as her statement continued. Totally ruins her credibility. In the meantime, the other burglary detectives are...
And this is an important piece. It's because a van is going to come up later on, all right? I would think that this would have been a very overwhelming situation for the investigators as well. They're getting different color vans. How many vans? One van, two vans? It sounds like there might have been multiple vans because based on what people are saying, well, there might have been an orange van. later on. So I can understand this being overwhelming while they're still trying to focus on an investigation and missing person at this time, right?
Working this burglary, and they're able to develop 2 suspects. We received a tip yesterday that led us to some suspects in the burglary case. We are confident they are the ones that committed the burglary. Stephen Todd and Donald Pierce were local criminals doing property crimes to source a narcotics habit. And when they find out that not only are they being looked at for the burglary, but they're also being fingered as possibly be involved in Laci's disappearance, their cooperation level changes to a level that we've seldom ever seen in a burglary investigation.
So these 2 burglars, okay, by the name of Stephen Todd and Glenn Pierce, all right, mugshots right here, okay, they're wanting to cooperate with the investigation, you know, because they're like, listen, our focus is just to burglarize the house. We weren't doing anything nefarious. We're willing to do a polygraph test. We're willing to cooperate with the investigations. Yes, that's what happened.
Others are like, whoa, we burgled the house. We did not kidnap this lady. We believe we were there the 27th. The problem with that is,
so the burglars are saying, we believe we were there on the 27th. But now the burglars are telling you all, we believed, based on our Palm Pilot, if they had Palm Pilots back then, I can't remember. Based on our, schedule, it looks like it was actually the 27th. That's what had happened.
They couldn't have done it on the 27th because the Medinas were home on the 27th. Could they get the dates wrong? Certainly. I mean, these guys don't have jobs.
So they couldn't have burglarized the house on the 27th because the people that they were burglarizing, their home, were home on the 27th. Now, Detective Broccini is saying here, could these guys have forgotten? Sure, they could have forgotten the dates because they're not paying attention to that. They're criminals, okay? That criminals are going to not pay attention to these kind of details.
They're not accountable for anything. There's no reason. They couldn't have done it on the 27th because the Medinas were home on the 27th. Could they get the dates wrong? Certainly. I mean, these guys don't have jobs. They're not accountable for anything. There's no reason to think that the 27th has any more significance than just an error in date recall by the 2 suspects who did the burglary.
So this is Detective John Bueller, who was also part of the case, all right? And Detective John Bueller at this point has asked, he still stands on everything. They got everything right on the investigation. However, he has spoken to News Nation about the fact that, if they have new evidence or new things, go ahead and test it. But he feels like they got it right the first time.
Between investigators and the burglars, the 26th became the time frame where the state of California believes the Medina house was burgled. And eventually investigators sort of zipped up about it.
One day after Stephen Todd and Glenn Pierce are arrested, the police are saying the burglary occurred on December 26th, and it's unrelated to Laci's disappearance. At the time, nobody questioned that. We all thought the police had done their due diligence. I believed it at first, but we kind of later put 2 and 2 together that on the 26th, that would be the last place that you would want to break and enter someone's home when there's a police presence and media presence.
Why would 2 experienced career criminals burglarize a house on days after a pregnant woman goes missing? And the house is across the street. Okay, they're going to attract attention. They burglarized the house on the 26th. Is that what investigators are saying? That would mean that, with all the commotion going out there, you wouldn't want that attention if you're burglarizing a house. That, in my opinion, doesn't make sense.
Todd and Pierce told us that when they got there, they noticed that there was media activity down the street. And they thought it was interesting. Apparently, they didn't know about the Peterson case yet at that time. But they were able to successfully complete the burglary, and then they split, and that was it. They knew they were going to jail for the burglary, and there's a code amongst inmates that you don't hurt children and you don't hurt vulnerable women. So not only did they take a polygraph, they were almost begging for a polygraph just so they could have the results to show the other inmates that they had no part of this. They did clear the polygraph. And in all the property that was recovered on this burglary, there was
Detective John Bueller said that they cleared the polygraph, okay?
not one piece of evidence, not one piece of property, jewelry, or anything else that was ever found to be related to Laci.
After confessing, turning over all the stolen property, giving polygraphs, their alibi for the 24th, the day Laci disappeared, they checked out. They were with family. They were checked out and cleared.
We're confident that we have the people in custody for the burglary and they are not connected with the missing of Laci Peterson.
I always questioned how they came to that possibility. I believe that it didn't happen on the 26th. The burglars knew it happened on the 24th, and they couldn't let the police know that they were in front of that house on the 24th. Because I believe that they were responsible for an incident involving Laci at that house.
They had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. There's nobody else I know other than a few media people that just like to stir the pot, and the Petersons that put any stock into the burglars.
In order to maintain Scott's
I really have a problem with Detective Bocchini, okay? And we'll get into that here in a minute. But him even saying that I said, okay, people are just trying to stir stuff. What if his investigation was inadequate? That's just my thought. Like, what if they had a shitty investigation and they're getting called out on it? Doesn't look good right now to have anything like this pop up and people questioning anything 20 plus years later.
Scott's innocence. His family has had to endorse improbable theories about the incompetence of the investigators and their belief that these burglars are responsible for Laci's disappearance.
But this is a clip from the Netflix new series on Laci Peterson, An American Murder, and so you guys can check it out. But that was probably the one thing that stood out to me. That is in part 2, so hopefully I'm able to air this without any copyright issues. Let's continue with our conversation. The Innocence Project is also calling out the investigators because they failed to properly investigate the van fire on Christmas morning. There was a van, Caltrans van, okay, which was found the day after Laci Peterson disappeared and was less than a mile away from the couple's home. There was a mattress in this van, and there were stains from the mattress in the back of a burned van that tested what looks to be positive for blood. There was a lieutenant by the name of Brian Spatulski, and I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, who investigated the van back in 2002, which again was found the day after Laci disappeared, and it was less than a mile away from the couple's home. News Nation did a couple of interviews with those that were formerly reporting on the story of Scott Peterson and Laci Peterson, as well as those that were either attorneys, Mark Garagos, or investigators back then. And I think it's important to bring that back because they recently did interviews, and some of these interviews were quoted in the new filings. So let's put this out here and let's talk about it because it's going to help us understand in present time, why is this information important now? What does this mean for Scott Peterson? And does it give you a different sense of understanding of this case? Let's go.
There was a van. Here's what they're going to present to a judge and say, listen, we need a new trial. There was a van, okay, an orange van. There it is. Was found a mile from Peterson's home. It was found by a Modesto fire inspector a day after Laci Peterson went missing. So what? Well, inside the van, there was a mattress. On the mattress was a blood stain. The inspector says it was human blood. Here's what he told GMA.
I don't know that I was tying the moment to Laci. I was more tying the moment that it was human blood. It made it like this was much more important than just a burned vehicle that somebody was just wanting to get rid of or cover up a simple crime.
Yeah, problem for him is, well, where were you 20 years ago? Anyway, let's bring in the news.
And that is the question that we all have. How did this come about? And this came about in 2015. It was found by a journalist. And what of it now? What do we make of it now? What do we do with this information?
News Nation correspondent who's been covering the Scott Peterson case since day one, Laura Ingle of News Nation. It's good to have you. So give me the history on the orange van. Have you heard this before?
You know, I had not heard about this particular van. We always heard about a van that was spotted across the street from Scott and Laci's house the morning or possibly in that time frame that Laci Peterson went missing. It was white, it was tan, it was brown, it was checked out, and the people that owned it were cleared. But this is a different van that we are now hearing about. And so all of us that have been covering this case have gone back and said, wait a minute, do you remember this? Do you remember this? So I started making phone calls today to find out if we could find the police report or the fire incident report, which I was able to just get about an hour ago. This is the incident report from the Modesto Fire Department that does in fact state that there was a van in this alley that firefighter Brian talked about, and there was a report about how it was found. And I'll read you just the summation at the end. This was a fully involved van fire. There was a rag hanging out of the gas fill hole with a gas cap on the ground, but this was not the cause of the fire. There were 3 or more gas cans in the vehicle with evidence of flammable liquid usage in the interior of the vehicle. This was an arson fire. The battery was missing.
And I think this is the frustrating part out of this whole case is there were so many witnesses. Witnesses would say one thing, witnesses would say another thing. They saw this, they saw that. And the van thing, it plays a part into this, which is to a certain degree, I understand why investigators would have had their hands full here. Okay. They're looking for what is credible. This woman just gave 3 different colors of a van. And then the owners were clear. That's what we were told. This is a separate van. Now, is this a new piece of evidence? I guess that's to be determined, right? But why didn't this come up before? Especially if the fire chief had a conversation with the investigators, right? Why wasn't this even, introduced into any of their filings? Why wasn't this discussed? Why wasn't this looked at? I personally feel like they kind of had their minds made up at this time, but at the same time, I mean, look at all these witnesses that are saying different colors and different things. So it's a hard one, you guys.
So this all seems new. And again, your question, I'm not sure where this report went in terms of whose hands it was in, but it is clearly in the archive file of the city of Modesto. I also made a phone call to the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department. So you've got the Modesto PD, you've got 2 different jurisdictions, right, and they cover different areas of Modesto. And so the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Office does cover part of what's known as the airport district where this alley was, made requests for reports from them as well. It's not clear who may have investigated this fire incident, but now we have it in our hands. And you can see that the burned out orange van is just a little over a mile away from Scott and Laci Peterson's home on Covina in Modesto. Again, this van discovered in flames the morning, Christmas morning, 2002.
Right. I just don't, I mean, that's clearly not enough. It would have to be that they took a sample of what they believed was human blood, that they still have it, that they can test it, and that it is somehow connected to somebody that is relevant in the investigation. Otherwise, I don't know what this means. Peterson's appellate lawyers say this could prove that he's innocent. Remember, not you didn't do it right, not guilty. Meaning he didn't do it, it was someone else. What is it? A burned out orange van. So what do we know? Who owned it? Who was it registered to? Who set it on fire? Why? Was it a cover-up? And why was all of this never disclosed to Peterson's attorneys on trial?
That's the question.
News Nation correspondent Laura Ingle joins us outside the Modesto Police Department. And we also have Mark Aragos, Scott Peterson's first attorney. Thank you for being with us.
Well, we've heard about this burned out orange van. And because, as you mentioned, I'm one of the many reporters who covered this 20 years ago, I had never heard of it. And I wanted to see exactly where it was in relation to Scott and Laci Peterson's home in Modesto. They live on a really nice street that does have a park that's known to have some transients and some activity there. But what we did was we took a drive. It's just over an hour, just over a mile away from the Peterson's home, this alley. And we've seen the pictures of the van, and there's a structure there. And at first, when I saw those pictures, I thought, okay, that was the alley. No, that's not the alley. It is a dirt road in between 2 streets in what's known as the airport district. This is not a good area of town. It is known for gang activity, drug dealing, auto theft. There's a lot going on. So this is where the orange van was found December 25th, 2002, the morning after Laci Peterson is reported missing. It is torched. It's got gas cans inside. And then it was towed away. It was towed to a yard. Then it was later towed here to Modesto Police to a warehouse where they did take a look at it. So if we wanted to get kind of our feet on the ground and see where this exactly was, because it's really close to Scott and Laci's home, Chris.
So criminals had access to the van because the trucking company allowed employees to have access to the van. But what did you learn about who it was registered to and why this apparently happened? And if there was any reason to suspect it could have had something to do with the Peterson situation?
Right. So we look into who this is registered to. It was to a guy, Terry Borden, and he owned a company named Borden & Sons Crane and Rigging. It's a company that's no longer around, but it is a yard where there's a lot of trucks. And Terry Borden was questioned about this van, who had access to it. And he said that his employees always had access to vehicles. He believed that that vehicle was stolen. And then there was a guy who he said was the last person to have access, this guy named Bobby Riggs. That was his second name. It was also Robert Smith, a.k.a. Bobby Riggs. But he said, yeah, I borrowed the van. I put it back at my boss's place on December 27th. Well, by that time, it had already been found, burned out, and had been towed here. So we knew that that wasn't true. So it's a very interesting twist here. And of course, because you've got this charred out back of the van that has a mattress that has what looks like blood stains and was tested for blood, you know, it's a huge question. And the fire investigator that has made all of this public in the LA Innocence Project documents did talk about going over to look at the van with Modesto Police and said that they took a look at it. And once people realized that there was blood, everybody came. The city attorney, the chief, everybody went and looked at this van. Evidence was taken. It was turned over to the DOJ, the Department of Justice, but we don't know exactly what happened next. And to your point, who got these reports? Was it Mark Garagos? Was it Peterson's defense team? It doesn't sound like it. And that is what the LA Innocence Project is looking at, because that van, or the part that you see where there's blood, there was a gas canister that was on top of it. And then when they pulled the gas canister off, that's why that area of the mattress is a little untouched. It's not all the way charred. Yeah. And they've
let me stop right here real quick, because I think it's important to kind of note this, okay? The reason why we know about this van is because it was a journalist that brought it to the attention to the defense. I want to go back all the way to that, and I want to find out who did she talk to? How did she bring attention to this? How did she say, how did she come up, he or she, because we don't know. I like to see a name. I mean, it's a journalist. It should be hard to just, you know, find out who or what put this out here. This is being looked at as a piece of evidence to help support Scott Peterson. Well, we got to take it back to how this journalist even came about this, because otherwise it's just, how much do we really know about this van other than it was there around the time all this happened? But it would be good to understand how the journalist got a hold of this. Who did the journalist talk to? And why are they even anonymous? They shouldn't be anonymous at this point, because it's about finding the truth at this point, right?
Mark Garagos, Bobby Riggs, you know, you're thinking, who's that? The one who played against Billie Jean King? You never heard of this guy's name. You were never given this information. Should you have?
Yeah, and it's frustrating, because we spent weeks doing hearings on mitochondrial DNA, because Modesto PD wanted to use a hair that was found, and they wanted to use the mitochondrial DNA. At the same time, they were delivering all kinds of stuff to the Department of Justice. It wouldn't have been very difficult in the least to have cross-checked all this stuff, because the very same department and lab was doing all kinds of testing at the same time. And so the frustration level is off the charts for me.
So basically, Mark Garagos is saying is that a lot of this information didn't come to him. It sounds like a lot of information might have been suppressed to the defense at that time, which could have helped, you know, during the trial. Y'all let me know your thoughts in the comments. And then there was possible evidence into question whether Scott Peterson actually placed Laci's body in the bay. There was even concerns about that she was actually wearing the black pants that Scott Peterson had said that she was wearing, like black pants or capris or something to that effect, because there were witnesses that also saw her with that, some of which the police had not talked to, but they're now speaking out on this new filing. Now, yesterday we got to review in a live stream one of the statements from the witnesses. We're reviewing it here, but I want to also show you something else, okay? The witness provided a picture of the MPD detective that he spoke with. This is the MPD detective I spoke to when I reported what I saw on Covina December 24, 2002. And this is Detective Brochini.
There's nobody else I know other than a few media people that just like to stir the pot, and the Petersons that put any stock into the burglars.
ICH hereby declare under penalty of perjury that the following is true. Okay, I currently reside in Stockton, California. I'm married and full-time employed. Okay. In March of 2024, attorneys representing Scott Peterson contacted me and asked me if I would speak to them about an event that occurred in 2002, around the time Laci Peterson was reported missing. I agreed to speak to them. So in December of 2002 and early January of 2003, I was 17 years old. This person and I were about the same age. Shout out to them. And I was living in Modesto, attending high school. I was a senior in high school at that time, and I was living with my friend Miguel and his grandmother at, Tenaya Avenue in the airport district. Before I started staying with Miguel and his grandmother, I was in the foster care system. Okay. December 24, 2002 was a school holiday. I rode my bike that morning from Tenaya, where I stayed to see a friend who lived in a scenic avenue north of La Loma Park. I believe the friend was living at, the address is there. It was mid-morning when I went to go see my friend, probably between 10:30 a.m. and 11 a.m. I rode my bike north towards Covina Avenue so I could cut through the park to get to Scenic. The trail that goes down into the park is at the end of Covina, where the street dead ends. When I got to the trail that leads down into the park, I saw a woman wearing black leggings, which is what Scott Peterson said that she was wearing. Or maybe they were sweats and a white blouse. She was walking a golden retriever towards the park. I believe the woman I saw was Laci Peterson. She was heading into the park at the same entrance, where I was headed on the north end of Covina. As I was riding my bike down the hill into the park, I passed a woman and I believe was Laci and the dog from behind, and I startled the dog. This person startled the dog, causing it to bark at me. I got to my friend's apartment, but I only stayed a short time because of her parents came back home unexpectedly. I think it was her dad. I wasn't supposed to be there, so I left through the back door and led to a patio, hopped a small fence, and got back onto my bike that was parked right there against the fence. This person had interaction with the dog, all right? Scared the dog. I mean, that's something to remember, right? If you saw a pregnant woman and you're riding the bike, you would remember if you startled the dog. CH says that I rode back through the park and came up the same trail from the park that led me out on Covina. I rode my bike south on Covina and saw a white van parked on the street. Okay. The van was parked on the east side of Covina facing north towards the park entrance. The rear doors of the van were open and I could see through the van windshield and thought the back doors open. I saw a white man inside the back of the van hitting on or punching down on something. The man had long hair that was brownish blonde. There's like a little handwriting edit there. I saw two other men standing near the back of the van. One was a tall white man and the other was a shorter Hispanic man. He could have been Mexican. I saw one of the men slam the van door in the back of the van. I didn't think anything of it at that time. 3 or 4 days later, I went back to visit the same girl at the apartment. I got to her apartment later than usual and she asked me what took so long. I told her that Covina was blocked off, so I couldn't cut across the park and had to take another route that was longer. At that point, I told her about the van that I had seen on Covina the morning when Laci went missing. I told her I thought I saw Laci walking her dog that morning heading into the park. We also talked about the news report saying that the house across the street from the Petersons was robbed. Around the same time, Laci disappeared. I told my friends I remember seeing a white van parked across the street from the Petersons' house that morning, and there were some men standing around it, maybe putting things into a van. My friends immediately told her parents about what I had seen, and her dad drove us both to the Modesto police station so I can report that I saw Laci walking the dog that morning she went missing, and also tell the police about the white van I saw. I recall at the time went to the police station, the cops were still looking for the people responsible for robbing the house across the street from Laci's house, because the burglary had not been solved yet. I recall the police announced they caught the burglars a day or two later. When we arrived at the police station, it was late afternoon or evening. There were numerous officers and reporters outside the police station. I got out of the car and approached a detective or an officer who was heavy set and had a mustache, slicked back hair. I told him, hey, I don't know if this is going to help the search for Laci at all, but I remember seeing Laci walking her dog in the park that morning when she went missing. And I also told him about seeing the white van. The officer told me, we got our guy, but thank you, or something to that effect. So we left. He didn't write any of my information down. He didn't give me his card. No one contacted me. A few weeks later in 2003, I moved away from Modesto because a relative who lived out of town was able to take me in. After I moved, I did not follow the coverage of the Laci Peterson case too much because I was focusing on other things. Well, just imagine, and if you're 17 at that time, you're not really thinking about this stuff. You know, I certainly didn't because I was in high school, you know, and then add in the factor that he or she's in foster care. Keep that in mind. I very much wonder what is the pushback from the prosecution's office to try to, test and revisit some of this. At the end of the day, it's my understanding that they'll be doing testing on a piece of tape that was found on Laci's clothes. I mean, if Scott's DNA is there, then that'll let us know our answer about who killed Laci Peterson. If there was other DNA, somebody else, another person's DNA, maybe that's something to think about. A post-conviction investigation into a claim of actual innocence begins with a review of the original investigation into the crimes at issue to determine whether any evidence or leads were missed or overlooked that may support the claim of innocence. If any are found, those leads and evidence are examined to determine whether anything discovered, whether new or old evidence or both, undermines the conviction and supports a claim of innocence. As set forth in Mr. Peterson's DNA motion and discovery motion, post-conviction counsel has identified numerous investigative failures committed throughout the original investigation in this case. As one example, the prosecution admits the numerous eyewitnesses reported seeing Laci Peterson walking in the neighborhood at the time after Mr. Peterson left home for the day, some of whom were never interviewed by police at all, and most of whom were never interviewed while Laci was missing or even prior to the trial. Despite the prosecution's efforts to offer hindsight justification for why these eyewitnesses were never interviewed, the simple truth is that those witnesses who reported seeing Laci walking in the neighborhood should have been a top priority in an unbiased missing person investigation. Not only may those witnesses provide information and lead to what happened to Laci Peterson, even if one of those witnesses' reports were credible, Mr. Peterson could not possibly have killed his wife and son. The prosecution has never disputed that fact. Post-conviction counsel has also identified considerable material exculpatory evidence that appears to have been suppressed at the time of the trial, as well as certain critical exculpatory evidence that was lost by the prosecution and therefore never provided to the defense at the time of the trial, including, to only name a few, the following items: the audio recordings between a man named Sean Tenbrink and his brother Adam Tenbrink, wherein Lieutenant Ponte reported hearing Adam tell Sean that Steve Todd was seen by Laci Peterson during the Medina burglary on the morning of December 24th, 2002, after Mr. Peterson had left home for the day, which the prosecution claims is lost. And the later call between Sean Tenbrink and his mother, wherein Lieutenant Ponte reported hearing Sean tell his mother to tell Adam that the police had just interviewed him and he was to keep his mouth shut because he doesn't know who he is dealing with. SCOTT Peterson's team is also asking the identity of the MPD officer, the Modesto Police Department officer or detective who interviewed Sean Tenbrink. Police reports or notes documenting that interview and any recording made of that interview between the police and Sean Tenbrink. An interview that Lieutenant Ponte stated he believes was recorded. The videotape interviews that Modesto police conducted with Stephen Todd and Donald Glenn Pierce after their arrest on January 2nd, 2003, which were logged into evidence but never provided to the defense. Now, there isn't a whole lot of information about Sean Tenbrink out there, but Sean Tenbrink, from what we understand from the little that I've been able to read, and it was through a little blog that I found this, it was said that Sean Tenbrink's connection to Laci Peterson begins in early January. At Norco, a housing person overheard Sean talking about Laci Peterson being missing and reported it to Lieutenant Xavier Ponte, who was assigned to the investigation unit. Now, Lieutenant Ponte reported the incident to the Modesto Police Department by first calling its hotline set up to receive tips on Laci. Getting no response, he called again within the same week. He did receive a response from a detective with the MPD and scheduled a time for the detective to interview Tenbrink. Before that interview occurred, however, Lieutenant Ponte listened to a tape recording of a conversation between Tenbrink and his brother Adam. The phone call was only 3 to 4 minutes in length, seems to be focused on Laci Peterson, and occurred 4 weeks after she was reported missing. To the best of Ponte's recollection, Adam told his younger brother Sean that Laci happened to walk up while Steve Todd was doing the burglary, and Todd made some type of a verbal threat to Laci. Reports of MPD's witness interview related to the Croton watch that was pawned on December 31st, 2002, and again on February 14, 2003, which have never been provided to the defense. And now the Croton watch, and I hope I'm saying it correctly. I think it's Croton. Listen, I've never owned an item like this, but let's go back a little bit to it because this is a watch that Laci Peterson had received. It was part of her inheritance of jewelry from her grandmother. Robin Rocha, Laci's aunt, testified that the watch and a pair of diamond earrings were not among the jewelry that police showed her in the weeks after her niece's disappearance. Okay, so in cross-examination, when the trial was happening, there were owners of different pawn shops where Laci and Scott had pawned other jewelry. Well, at the time, attorney Mark Gregos showed the witness a pawn ticket he said came from a store called the Pawn Shop. He said the ticket, which contained a thumbprint of the person pawning the item, was dated December 31st of 2002 and listed a Croton watch. Gregos did not reveal the name of the person who pawned the watch. Again, back then, prosecutors believed that Scott Peterson had killed Laci Peterson, who was pregnant, sometime on December 23rd or 24th, okay? And then dumped her body from his 14-foot boat into the San Francisco Bay. The defense also didn't receive information about Gene Ralston. The video recording or partial recording taken on Gene Ralston's boat on March 11, 2003, depicting that Mr. Ralston publicly stated he believed to be the body of Laci Peterson located approximately 3 miles north of the location where Mr. Peterson fished. The defense was not provided with that partially successful videotape. The prosecution had argued that the defense counsel could have and should have called those witnesses at trial, and the failure to call those witnesses and the failure to present other exculpatory evidence into Mr. Peterson's defense at trial is an issue that cannot be revisited by this court. That argument is not supported by the authorities, and it reflects that the prosecution's commitment to protecting its conviction at any cost and its lack of understanding as to how many wrongful convictions have been overturned based on police and prosecutorial misconduct, confirmation bias, ineffective assistance of counsel, and, as is most often the case, is some combination of those errors, among others, which do not come to light until after the conviction becomes final. And this is the argument Scott Peterson's team is making now, that sometimes people can get convicted and we don't actually find out information until after the fact, some of which it's either lost or doesn't get reported, doesn't get, into evidence, whatever may be the issue. And that is the issue that Scott Peterson's team is making right now, is that it is an issue of the court. If there is prosecutorial misconduct, if there was a robbery and people didn't get interviewed, or if somebody made a confession and someone heard it, but that also didn't get into evidence, it all plays a part into this, right? Scott Peterson's team right now is making an outline, providing the courts that there is enough to point out a consistent pattern of suppressing evidence. And in that, I think could be problematic for anybody listening to this case, anybody, with new ears. If this is just a portion of the questioning that we have right now, what else don't we know that should have been shown back when this crime happened? In addition, consistent with this pattern of suppressing evidence and relevant to the instant DNA motion before the court, as the prosecution is well aware, the complete police file related to the vehicle fire involving the orange former Caltrans van was suppressed by the prosecution at the time of the trial, was not discovered until a journalist tracked down fire investigator Spitulski in 2015, who informed him that there would be more photos in the file, which the journalist then obtained from an anonymous source. It was not until the journalist made Mr. Peterson's attorney aware of the photos that his counsel was able to request the files associated with this former Caltrans orange van fire from the Attorney General's office. Not until March 18th of 2016 was Mr. Peterson provided with more comprehensive investigation report prepared by Detective Grogan related to the van fire. And even then, Mr. Peterson was still not provided with the 6 photos of the burned van and blood-stained mattress that was part of a missing person investigation. Not until after Mr. Peterson made a second request on July 19th of 2016 asking for any color photos of the van did the county district attorney's office finally provide Mr. Peterson with photos of the blood-stained mattress over 13 years after the photos were taken, at which time the prosecution agreed to conduct very limited DNA testing on the stained mattress fabric from the back of the van. Counsel's investigation into the original investigation in this case is obviously hampered by the purported loss and or suppression of evidence. For all of these reasons, counsel filed the 2 motions currently pending before the court seeking post-conviction discovery and DNA testing of physical items of evidence to further investigate Mr. Peterson's claim of innocence. Notwithstanding these challenges presented by suppressed, missing, and lost evidence, post-conviction counsel investigation into the disappearance and the murder of Laci and Connor Peterson has already yielded important leads to evidence supporting Mr. Peterson's claim that his wife was alive on December 24th, 2002, and when he left home for the day, that he did not kill her. In the opposition of the DNA motion, the prosecution does not contend that the loss and suppressed evidence listed above and the other evidence Mr. Peterson seeks by way of the 2 motions pending before the court has been provided to the defense, nor does the prosecution refute that many investigative failures ineffected the original investigation until the disappearance and death of Laci and Connor Peterson. As alleged in the instant DNA motion, instead, the prosecution argues that the court should strike an admissible hearsay. Much of the evidence Mr. Peterson has presented that Scott Peterson is not entitled to the discovery in the DNA motion. In other words, the prosecution is arguing that Mr. Peterson has not met his burden of making a prima facie showing that he is entitled to the DNA testing he seeks, while it continues its decades-long suppression of some of the very discovery Mr. Peterson needs to investigate evidence he believes will support his claim that he did not harm or kill his family. In other words, and in short, the argument that's being made here, the prosecution is saying that Mr. Peterson has not met his burden of making prima facie, showing that he is entitled to the DNA testing he seeks, while it continues its decades-long suppression of some of the very discovery Mr. Peterson seeks to investigate evidence he believes will support his claim, and that he did not harm or kill his family. My question to you guys in the chat as you're listening to this review, what is the big deal with SCOTT Peterson being able to test this evidence or review the evidence? Why is it an issue for there to be a review of some of this? If he was convicted and it was well done then, I guess my question is, like, what's the problem with doing it now? Do we fear that there might be bigger issues at hand? Like, what if it gives us a different outcome? And I'm not really sure what the right legal or way to say it, but like, if everything comes out, say that all this new evidence has his DNA, then the conviction would stand, right? What is the fear with having stuff be retested? Are we worried that it's going to be inconclusive? If it's inconclusive and the man's been already convicted, I don't know how far he's going to get with where he's at, if that makes sense. I mean, if he's guilty, he's guilty, right? Is there anything else that would be out there to change it? This man was charged on circumstantial evidence, right? There's a lot that's at play. One thing that even now still hits me, still is in my mind, what Amber Frey said. Amber Frey had said that Scott told her that he had lost his wife. That sticks out in my mind, right? And for those that defend Scott, and for those that feel like Scott is innocent, one of the things they keep saying is what Amber Frey says doesn't matter because it's like her word against him. Now, that's what people are saying. That's why I played that first clip when we started this video, so you guys can hear the other side of what people are saying. Y'all, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What's the issue with him testing and revisiting the things that he wants to revisit? I think it couldn't hurt, unless it does hurt because there's more that we don't know. Maybe that's the issue. SCOTT Peterson's team believes that he has satisfied the criteria necessary for the court to grant, DNA motion and testing and whatnot. At the time of this filing, which was in May, they were asking that the court determine that Mr. Peterson has met the pleading and proof requirements as to some of the evidence that he seeks to test. The issue for the court is whether SCOTT Peterson is entitled to develop his own potentially exculpatory evidence. Scott's team wasn't asking for some type of relief. What they're asking is that the court grant motions that satisfy the requirement that Scott's entitled to retest DNA and have these items looked at. But the prosecution proclaims that it has its utmost confidence in the jury's guilty verdict, and yet they vehemently refuse to consent to test any of the evidence that Scott seeks to submit for DNA testing, and they refuse to comply with their discovery obligations. But if the prosecution is certain that Mr. Peterson is guilty, they should have no reason to oppose any testing or efforts to conduct further investigation and provide him with the discovery and further DNA testing he seeks. On the other hand, if Mr. Peterson is innocent and did not harm or kill his family, as he maintains, the DNA testing requested could not only exonerate him, it could provide valuable leads to other suspects who may have committed these horrific crimes. This is an interesting part because SCOTT Peterson's team is also making the argument that a detective who worked extensively on the investigation into the disappearance of Laci Peterson publicly supported that the court grant the motion when he stated on News Nation, "I welcome them to test, DNA, test more evidence. Feel free to do it." Detective John Bueller even said, "Hey, listen, test it and dig through it. But the big thing is test that blood. And if we have the wrong guy, I want the truth out. If This detective worked on that case for so many years. I mean, why would he? I guess my thought is like, why would you go on public television and say that and question it publicly? Because if this was your investigation, right? Like, and I'm assuming he's no longer there unless he is. I'm not really sure. You would think that you would stand behind the work that you did if that's the work that you were, if that was your investigation. Why would you publicly go and say, like, test it? Maybe we got the wrong maybe we got the wrong guy. What do you mean? You shouldn't have gotten the wrong guy. And if you got the wrong guy, then you didn't do your job right back then, right? You even had the fire inspector, Brian, who also came forward with concerns about the lack of investigation into bloodstains on the mattress found in the back of the burned out orange van. Also told CBS News, let the facts say what the facts need to say. Even one of the jurors, okay, by the name of Mike, said if they think we're going to find something different that sheds light on something new, I fully support it. He was even praising the Innocence Project for taking up the investigation and looking into this. So, I mean, my thing is that there's clearly a lot of people that question whether they got it right back then. Now, this video has become very long, and I didn't get to every part of everything. But I feel like I can conclude this by talking about a little bit about the media, right? People have said in my comments and even in the research that I was looking into, you know, the media drove this case. The media drove this case. And although I agree with that statement, I would probably say that it was so many moving parts to this. Mark Garagos, who was representing Scott Peterson at the time, also drove the media. He drove the media and he told people at one point that Laci Peterson had been abducted by a cult. I don't know how he came about that theory, but he had literally told the public that she was the victim of a satanic cult. And he told them that this was part of their police investigation. These attorneys, these law enforcement folks were dropping information out to the media so willingly. And my question is to everybody is, how is that any different than what we're doing today in some of these cases that are happening? I can agree that guilt was driven by the press. And Scott Peterson's behavior also didn't help. His unwillingness, the way he would talk about things, the way he would smirk, the way he would smile, his affair with Amber Frey, his leaving to Mexico, dyeing his hair, getting money out, a lot of this, I get it. But do I think that the investigation was pretty shitty? Yes. I don't like the excuses that this detective is giving. I really don't. I think that they're very shitty. This is a life and death situation. This is an investigation. It's a criminal investigation. And this man was on death row. Now look at where we're at now. Listen, y'all let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, I would appreciate if you hit the like button. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you for joining me for this whole video if you stayed here. I appreciate you guys oh so much. You guys let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you guys think? I'll see you guys on the next one. And please support my channel. Please support me. All my links are in the description box. Hit the like button. Share this video. Bye, guys.